guys? I have no idea where we're supposed to go from here after what they've done. This is the finale of She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. It's episode 9. Let's conversationalize. Okay, guys. I'm gonna be honest with a few things for a minute. I know I say that a lot, but honesty is important. After I finished the episode, I had to just take it all in for a minute, and I still haven't fully come to terms with what I witnessed. My mind is baffled to a point of ultimate chaos in my brain. Like, you might be wondering why I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt instead of a Marvel shirt. Why I'm wearing like a Bantha, the scene from Book of Boba Fett, and why I'm wearing kyber crystals. And I have like the lightsaber that I usually use for my Andor reviews, and it's because of how indescribably mind-boggling this episode was. And not even in a way of it sucked to the point of this. Oh, no. What it does has astronomical effects on the MCU in a way that is completely irreverent. Let's start off. So I will say, the opening of this episode is phenomenal, the way they recreated this, because the opening of this episode is a replication of the intro from the 1978 Hulk TV series. And it is like scene for scene, almost a complete redo of that intro, except it's Jennifer Walters as She-Hulk. They have her trying to replace her tire like in the old intro. They have her be in the chair about to perform the gamma radiation experiment that ends up giving her powers. They even call back. And what's awesome is that I said this in my very first video period, and very first video of my She-Hulk reviews, that in that episode, in the very first one, when the origin that takes place for her to end up having Hulk powers in the first place, when she gets Bruce's blood inside her arms, I said that whole origin was very reminiscent of the 1978 Hulk series, and now they confirm that I was right about that being a callback in that episode, because now in this one they have redone that to where, yes, they explain that she got the blood from Bruce Banner, and then they still have her in the seat, and so they redo it shot for shot, and it's awesome. She even does the thing where she's like, "Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." And then she has Mark Ruffalo beside her, who is wearing literally almost the exact same clothes as Bill Bixby did as Bruce Banner, or David Bruce Banner in that show, in the 1978 Hulk series. That part is great. And what's funny is that scene where she's like, "Don't make me angry, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry," was in the trailer for She-Hulk. Or not even the trailer, I think it was in the very first teaser. Like the very first one to tease the show. That was the scene they chose. And what's hilarious is that it's literally like 5 seconds in the finale, and that one scene did not convey anything at all about what the rest of the show is going to be. So it's just funny to me that they chose that scene to be a teaser, their very first teaser for when they were starting the promotion for all the newer Disney Plus shows coming out. But anyway, that whole intro is great. They even have it at the end of the intro. They have Jen's face on one side of the screen, and then the She-Hulk makeup woman She-Hulk face on the other side, just like in the old show when it was Bruce Banner's face on one side and Hulk's face on the other, and it's like cracked and torn apart down the middle of the screen between the two faces. So that was really cool detail there, and really cool details overall. But anyway, it ended up being a dream, and she wakes up in prison. Even the intro mentioned that she was in prison for what she did at the end of the last episode. And I was actually glad that they were finally addressing consequences for actions. Like, the fact that she did what she did at the end of the episode, like, the SWAT team, like, they captured her. And she's in prison now because she went out of control. And I did like that there was consequences. And so Mallory, Book, Nikki, and Pug walk in to see her in prison. And the first thing Jen asks is if they've contacted Bruce about all this. And Pug says, well, we've tried sending multiple messages, but he hasn't responded. I felt I was very calm considering I was talking to the freaking Hulk. And that line actually did make me laugh a good bit. I'm not really sure why. I think it was just the way because it made perfect sense that anyone who would be talking to the Hulk would be like super excited that they're even talking to him or sending a message to him at all. So I just thought it was a really funny line that also made sense. And I wish the whole show was written like that. I wish all of the previous episodes had funny stuff that made sense, which made you laugh even more. Because, I mean, the stuff I laugh at mainly is the funny because it's true stuff. The satire kind of humor. And so that's essentially what that joke was, and I wish the whole show was like that because that really did make me laugh. But anyway, Mallory talks to She-Hulk about her case, and She-Hulk's like, or Jen at this point is like, we gotta track these intelligentsia guys down, we gotta make sure they pay for what they did to me. And Mallory's like, we don't need to think about that right now. The fact of the matter is, you went out of control. Like, they gave you the bait, and you took it. So we need to just focus on you getting out of all this mess. And Mallory says that they negotiated a plea deal with the prosecution. And I did enjoy that part because that was like the first lawyer thing in relation to not Matt Murdock that they actually were able to get right. It's like, hey, we negotiated a plea deal. That makes sense. I read a little bit about plea deals. It's like negating some of the charges the defendant has if they admit that they're guilty, lessening some of the punishment they have. Like the prosecutor will take away some of the punishments and negate some of the charges of the defendant if the defendant admits to being guilty of whatever they did. Now, I did not see whether or not that means that they would go free. Maybe that's what that means. Maybe that would fall in line with one of the punishments taken away. But there also is even consequences after that, like especially consequences after that, because when she actually does get out of prison because they negotiated the deal, she can't become She-Hulk anymore. Because they put that same inhibitor brace on her that they did on Blonsky to prevent her from hulking out. And so now she goes back home and she's all over the news that she lost control and nobody likes her anymore. And even one of the news girls says that like an anonymous neighbor of hers said that they were uncomfortable being close to a rampaging Hulk. They call her unstable. And it is interesting because the conversation that Mallory has with Jen in the prison, when Mallory's telling Jen, like, you took the bait, like, you still went out of control. Like, the intelligentsia may have instigated you into doing it, but you still fell for it and went out of control. And Jen's defense was, well, I was angry. I mean, that's any normal person's normal response to that. Like, that's any person's normal response to what they did to me. And Mallory says, yeah, well, you're not just anybody, you're an out-of-control Hulk. And that's what the people saw. That is a perfect argument, and a right one. Like, Mallory is by far the person in the right in this conversation. Jen's trying to make the case that, oh, well, she just got angry. And Mallory's like, yeah, well, you can't do that like everybody else. Like, when everybody else gets angry, they don't turn into a monster who could potentially kill people and destroy buildings. And that is the core issue of episode 1 when Hulk was trying to explain that to Jen, and Jen was like, oh, no, it's fine. I control my anger way better than you, Bruce. That's what it is now. She's lost control, and now she's facing the consequences. But I will say, again, this is all just the beginning of the episode, like the very beginning. We haven't even gotten to the middle stuff yet, and boy, if ever, this finale will go down in history in all superhero stuff. Like, not just TV shows, not just live action superhero stuff. Like, it will go down in history for all superhero stuff ever for what this episode does. Whether it's good or not is going to be debated by many people. I'm looking forward to seeing the reactions of you guys as well as other people to what they did in this episode, because it is so indescribably insane. Like, it literally is insane. And some of you might think I'm overreacting, but I mean, if we really look at what they did, it's big. Moving on, obviously she doesn't have her job anymore because of what happened at the gala, of her hulking out and losing control. And what's weird is that Nikki kind of makes a big deal out of it, saying like, oh, these people suck, you don't need them. I stole all their kitchen food and gave it all to you out of spite because this company sucks. But she still decides to work there. Nikki does. And it's one of those things where there is definitely some understandability to them firing her after what happened. Like, she needs some sort of counselor. Who she needs? I wonder who she needs. Maybe somebody who's been through her struggles before. Maybe someone who knows exactly what it's like to struggle with his anger every day of his life, and someone who has experience in that arena and might be able to counsel her on how to do it and what not to do. That would be a really great, convenient person if they were in her life. Oh wait, they're related to her. Oh wait, he did talk to her. Oh wait, she refused his help. That's why it ends up ringing hollow. I really hoped, especially by the beginning of this episode when Mallory was talking to her, after that scene, I was like, hey, we might actually be getting to stuff where she realizes that she was wrong to tell Bruce what she did, and she's going to have to face that. But she really doesn't. Like, the character development that you think is about to happen by the beginning of this episode does not happen. Because they end up meandering and then just losing their minds and getting drunk before they wrote the finale of this finale. And so she goes and visits her parents, and because a bunch of news people are outside her window all the time now because of what she did at the gala and them trying to get information, like, how do you feel about not being She-Hulk anymore and just invading her privacy and annoying her and annoying her and annoying her, she decides to take the mom and I guess subsequently the dad on their offer and move back in with them. And the mom says that Jen can have her old room in the house, even though the mom has been using it as a gym. And so She-Hulk gets everything out of her house, moves in to her parents' house, and one scene she's walking through the door, I guess with the last box she has from her old house to officially move into her parents' house. And there's newscasters even outside in their front yard, and the dad is watering the grass with the hose, and then he ends up spraying them. I did think that was genuinely funny. But then we learn that Jen is still very adamant about tracking the intelligentsia down and figuring out who they are so she can prosecute them for her crimes against her. Which, that makes perfect sense. She wants justice. Obviously, what happened was not entirely her fault. I'm just saying that Mallory was right about her taking the bait when intelligentsia offered it. There is a weird moment, though, where Nikki says, yeah, when we find these guys, we're going to destroy them by any means necessary. And then Jen, with the right response, is like, yeah, legally. We're going to destroy them legally. And then Nikki's like, I said by any means necessary. And that's kind of a disconcerting prospect, that Nikki is like, oh yeah, let's just kill these guys when we find them. That's a bit wrong. That's a bit unhealthy. We might want to talk to somebody about that, Nikki. So yeah, that was a little weird. And she has a bunch of pictures on this board, and one of them kind of looks like Man-Thing. And spoilers for Werewolf by Night, because I'm pretty sure Man-Thing made an appearance in that project. So that could be an allusion to Man-Thing. It is funny because under that picture, there's a post-it note that says, this guy, and with like an exclamation points. So, might be important. I don't really know. Could be nothing. I mean, it is part of the Intelligentsia board, and it's obviously Man-Thing's not part of Intelligentsia. But anyway, She-Hulk just crashes on her bed because she's just annoyed about everything. She's annoyed that they're not finding enough information about intelligentsia. She's annoyed about her mom constantly pandering her and embarrassing her and asking her to do this and that and all that stuff. Then she breaks the fourth wall again. Boy, does that come up later. And she's like, well, this isn't a reluctant superhero story. I'm just getting the short end of the stick. Do you guys want me to become She-Hulk? Do you want this to happen to me so I can become a superhero? And that was an interesting question to ask. And I mean, yes, that is kind of what we want when you're a superhero and you're based on a comic book. Then you kind of want her to become a superhero. You kind of want her to become who she was always meant to be. You hear that same narrator guy start to narrate what's happening inside of Jen's mind. He's like, she's at a new low, and then she's like, oh, stop it, we don't go that off the rails, we don't need a narrator. And that is a very ironic statement because boy do they go off the rails. Anyway, she contacts Hulk, Bruce, he doesn't respond, or it says not delivered, weirdly. And she then contacts Emil, and that also says not delivered, but she remembered that Emil said that she could stop by the meditation resort anytime, so Jen decides to stop by the meditation resort. And she even says she's going to spend a few nights there. Meanwhile, Nikki is trying to track down more intelligentsia stuff, and she ends up using this embarrassing video that Jennifer's mom sent to her as a way of getting into this event that the intelligentsia guys are having. And so by sending the video to them, they're like, oh, hey, that's such a great video, it's so embarrassing for her, you could totally come on in, bro. So clearly the contextualization, especially what's divulged later in the episode, is they're all dudes, because, you know, all the dudes are the bad guys. That's definitely the vibes I'm getting from this, especially the stuff they're writing for these guys to say in this event, like at the lodge where all the stuff goes down. I mean, that's very much a dig at the fans who have been genuinely critical of Marvel's direction on things lately. And that's been established, you know, in the previous episodes. Crystal clear. Anyway, Nikki realizes it's all dudes because the message said, hey, you could totally come to our thing, bro. And so they'll be expecting a dude. So Nikki then, of course, asks Pug for a favor. We all know what the favor is. And it's funny because Pug is still a nice guy. He has consistently remained a nice dude in the show, which I have appreciated. The thing is, though, he is not the most intelligent dude in the show. Like, he's not a jerk. He's also not very competent. She gets him to go to the event for her while she's outside in the car, and so he can mingle with the other guys trying to find out any information he can about the group as a whole. And he gets in there and he starts mingling, and he has this AirPod in his left ear so he can talk to Nikki, and she's cutting in and out when he's hearing her because he says the Wi-Fi reception there is terrible. When I heard that, I was like, okay, they're at Blonsky's meditation resort. Because it made sense, because Jen had already gone there. And so it made sense for everything to converge into one spot. So far we're making an average amount of sense. So far. So Pug starts mingling with the other dudes, and he sees Todd Phelps. And remember, guys, how I said that if he ended up being the leader of the intelligentsia, if he ended up being Hulk King, I would not be very happy? He's Hulk King. No leader. No leader in this episode, even though it made perfect sense. No leader. I'm not aware that he's anybody special in the comics. He was likely just created for this show. Maybe he was some random side character in the comics that didn't matter. They've done that before, like with Aldrich Killian. But, yeah. He's the leader of the intelligentsia this whole time. We're all building up to him. The lamest reveal ever. They have, for the most part, been so terrible with their villain reveals in the Marvel TV shows, in the Disney Plus shows. Except for Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin and Hawkeye, and He Who Remains / variant of Kang the Conqueror in Loki. Other than that, it's been terrible. WandaVision was Agatha Harkness like 3 episodes before the finale, and she's not that big of a character. Sharon Carter ended up being the big bad of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, even though Falcon and the Winter Soldier still didn't know that by the end of this TV show. And, somehow she turned evil. And now this. And now this with She-Hulk. I said that if they didn't do Leader, it would be the biggest wasted opportunity ever. They totally could have set him up in this episode for Captain America New World Order. Would have been great, would have been awesome. But did they do that? No. They did the dumbest thing they could have done. And there you go. And that's not the worst of it. Because, obviously, the lodge is at the meditation resort. Wrecker tells Jen while she's at the resort that Emil Blonsky is at the lodge because she really wants to talk to him about what she's been going through with not having a job anymore and everybody hating her now because, he's a meditation coach. And sure enough, Abomination is the guest speaker at the Intelligentsia's event. And he's in Abomination form. And he wasn't faking. He was not faking. He was lying about not turning into the Abomination, because in episode 7, when his parole officer thought that the inhibitor brace had malfunctioned, Blonsky said that he was trying to catch his chicken and he was on an electric fence, and so that's why it malfunctioned. So I have a feeling that was a lie. He was actually doing events for this group. What's weird to me is that it's all clear, like, the main motive of Intelligentsia has been, like, we hate She-Hulk, we want to destroy She-Hulk, She-Hulk is terrible. And so Abomination still seems protective of Jennifer later, like, when he tries to save her. Yet he knows, or at least should know very well, the motivations of this group, who apparently he's been coaching for a while now. I just don't know how those things mesh. Like, why would you be coaching this group who clearly hates your other friend, who you apparently care about and are trying to protect? I don't know. It's stupid. Because he wasn't faking. So not only is Leader not the bad guy, Abomination wasn't faking. All the meditation stuff, the resort stuff, him being a namaste, making toilet kombucha kind of guy, that was real. They took such a phenomenal character. They took a character that I loved and turned him into a non-ferocious, non-intimidating meditation coach. Not intimidating in persona. Not anymore. Of course, the monster of Abomination is still going to be intimidating, but when he's just talking in his normal voice, as if he's not this 8-foot tall beast that should be being a villain right now. Then Jen walks in, discovers that Abomination, or Blonsky, has been turning into the Abomination and has been violating his parole by doing so, and so she's of course mad at him. Then Todd Phelps reveals to Jen that they got her blood, the whole big setup for Josh getting her blood, and then he injects it into himself and turns into a Hulk. And it's bad when the protagonist of the show herself admits how stupid that is. And that's what that whole plot line about them taking her blood was building up to. Not some innovative, not some cool idea of the leader wanting the Hulk blood back because he lost it at the end of the Edward Norton Hulk movie because it was likely confiscated. None of that. Nothing cool. It's just this random dude is going to inject himself with Hulk blood and become a Hulk for 0.2 seconds. He tries to attack Jen. Abomination saves her from Todd Phelps. Then Titania shows up for no reason. Then Bruce Banner, Professor Hulk shows up for no reason and starts fighting Abomination. Abomination's like, this is not what you think, and then Banner starts fighting him anyway. And then even She-Hulk is pointing out, as all this is happening, she's like, these storylines don't make sense. Like, they don't go together at all. What are we doing right now? And then the MCU apocalypse, the MCU Armageddon, the MCU Doomsday arises. The 10 times the power of what happened in the Flashpoint storyline in the comics of DC, when Flash accidentally broke his universe and created a different one. That is like magnified in this one scene. Because Disney Plus, the menu, the Marvel MCU menu for Disney Plus, that's on Disney Plus, when you click on Marvel, shows up on the screen in the She-Hulk episode. It was so jarring to the point where when it happened, I questioned whether or not I had accidentally hit a button on my remote to exit the episode. And then she starts talking. And I was like, oh yes, this is actually happening. They're actually going this far. They're actually doing this. She says she's going to break her inhibitor brace. She turns into She-Hulk. Somehow she has her superhero outfit. She breaks out of her face, out of her poster on her show, because you got the menu with a bunch of other Marvel projects, and she's looking down, seeing which one she needs to go to see the writers about all the craziness that's going on and why none of it works. And she jumps down. Well, before that, she's like, hey, look, Assembled. That'll do. Because Assembled is the bunch of documentaries that Marvel has been releasing for their newer projects ever since the Disney Plus shows started. And she goes down, breaks open the Assemble poster so she can go inside the Assembled show. So it's implied that she's gone to the real world, our world. But I guess she's not, because of something that's revealed later. But once she gets there, she's in a studio, and you can overhear other guys talking about the first Thor movie and the Infinity Gauntlet. Like them making the first Thor movie. So this is in the real world. This is the nth degree of meta. The fourth wall breaks that has been happening previously, the ones where she's like talking about the fact that there are previously on segments and acknowledging that she's in a show and acknowledging Twitter and all that, that does not even remotely hold a candle to this finale. She walks outside in the larger area of multiple studios and writing rooms, and she finds a door with the logo of She-Hulk Attorney at Law on it, and walks in and starts talking to the writers about how original the plot line is of the villain stealing her blood and injecting it into himself so he can become a super soldier. Obviously she's being sarcastic because it's not original, because it's been done a lot of times. And so she's literally talking to the writers. And I'm pretty sure those are the actual writers for She-Hulk. Those people. And she's talking to them about how none of the plot lines fit together with what they've just established at the whole lodge fight with Titania and Professor Hulk and Abomination and Tom Phelps now as a Hulk and Jennifer. And she's talking about how none of that makes any sense for it to happen. And then one of the writers says, well, that's the way Kevin wanted it. And I had the subtitles on, so I saw it was all caps Kevin and then with dots in between the letters, so I could tell that there was something fishy going on about that. But I did think that obviously they were going to have Kevin Feige appear in the episode. I thought that that's what they were going to do. They don't. Which probably would have been better if they did with than what we actually got. But So she's like, I want to go talk to Kevin. And there are all these posters on the wall of like concept art for how She-Hulk is going to look and comics covers of She-Hulk. And she ends up having to fight her way to see Kevin because none of the writers and none of the people there want her to see Kevin, because apparently no one sees Kevin because Kevin is like the ultimate higher up and he's the one who makes all the decisions, and you can't argue with Kevin and you can't see Kevin about anything. He's like Oz the Great and Powerful, and I did think that they were going to have a pay no attention to the man behind the curtain moment, but they don't. But she even goes to this guy before that trying to see Kevin, and he's like, can you sign this? And in the background you have Iron Man armors on the wall, just like in Tony's Malibu mansion. You had the Mark II and then the Mark VII from the first Avengers movie, the one that he uses at the end to fight the Chitauri. And so you have those armors on the wall. Then she fights her way to Kevin, and once she finally gets to where Kevin is, she's in this giant room where she sees the wall of a bunch of different screens playing a bunch of different Marvel movies. And you even hear like the Marvel MCU classic music playing when that happens. And it's just like, because that's the thing that Kevin Feige has stood in front of when he's making new announcements about what new Marvel movies and shows are going to be coming out. And it's like, that is world breaking. It's universe breaking. It's multiverse breaking. Because acknowledging that the MCU is the MCU in the MCU means that there's really no investment to any of the characters. And what I mean by that is, like, if the MCU now knows it's the MCU, even if there's only one character, even if Jen is the only character that knows she's in the MCU, if that's the case, and none of the stuff that happens actually matters, and you can change it on a dime like she ends up doing, then it's all just make-believe inside their own universe. So none of it actually has any real value to the characters inside their universe, because their universe, now they themselves know that they're in this made-up universe. It is the ultimate fourth wall break. Forget fourth wall. It breaks all four walls. Not just the fourth wall. It breaks all four. Like I said, mind-boggling. It took me a very long time to process the fact that they even did that. It's insane, the level of world breaking that is. Of multiverse breaking. So she sees Kevin, who's a robot, apparently. He's an artificial intelligence. And K.E.V.I.N is an acronym that stands for Knowledge Enhanced Visual Interconnectivity Nexus. So it is essentially a robot that is designed for the sole purpose of entertaining the audience. And he says that I am tasked with creating near perfect entertainment. And he even acknowledges that some are better than others, but he says he leaves that debate up to the internet. The real world is now in the MCU, but it's not the real world, because in the real world, Kevin Feige is the one running the show, not a robot. So Jen is trying to convince Kevin that the ending for her show is crap, and she wants her ending changed. But before Kevin will talk with her, Kevin's like, I need you to change back into Jen form, because she's currently in She-Hulk form. And she's like, why? And he goes, we need to save money. We need to save money. And it's even been openly stated that the visual effects artists have been overworked because of all the projects going down in the MCU, and it costs a lot of money to make those visual effects. And so he literally says on the show, he's like, we need to save money, so we need you not to be She-Hulk right now. And he also says that the camera is going to need to pan away from you to not show you transforming into Jen, because the VFX artists have left to go work on a new project. And when he says that, you hear the bongos of Wakanda. You hear the Wakandan bongos playing that they did in Black Panther. So obviously he's saying that the VFX artists went to go work on Wakanda Forever, so he's acknowledging the next movie that's coming out in the MCU slate. And then once that happens, Jen starts making her closing statement, as she puts it. She's like, well, this is a legal comedy, so may I make my closing statement? And Kevin's like, oh, I see what you did there. And she starts explaining that she literally says, she's one of the Marvel Cinematic Universe characters, and she says, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So she's not just aware that she's in a fictional world, she's aware of exactly what kind of fictional world it is, and which one it is. I mean, that almost breaks every fictional universe. If the characters inside this one can distinguish which fictional universe they are inside of. Ow! My brain has been in consistent pain ever since I saw this episode. She explains that many people say that all of the Marvel movies have the same ending. You shove a bunch of plot and a bunch of action into one climax. And she proposes the idea that the ending of her show should be different. So you are intrigued and wondering, like, okay, what is that difference going to be? And it is true that many Marvel movies have, giant battle sequences, much CGI everywhere, and all the plot lines coming together at the end of the movie, which that point that she references specifically, the whole plot lines point, I mean, that's required of any TV show or film. All of your plot lines need to come together at some point during your project, or it is not a very good project. So she explains that to Kevin, and she's saying that all of that stuff that gets shoved into the climax is a distraction from the actual story and the actual characters in that story, the main character, which is her. In this case, in this context, she's talking about herself. And it is true that a lot of the Disney Plus shows have had that problem of rushing their finales, of not setting up things properly beforehand to earn all the payoffs in the finale that happen, and to earn all the plot lines coming together in the ways they do. And some of them have not even come together in the best ways. So she is right to a certain extent. And then she talks about how the conflict of the story is supposed to be her whole life was ruined when she was just about to figure out how to be both She-Hulk and Jennifer Walters, be both a lawyer and a superhero. And that is true. But the conflict should have been, you can literally almost word for word keep the first episode the same and have the rest of this season being her just realizing, man, maybe Bruce was right. Maybe I need to be a superhero. Maybe I can help people both as a lawyer and a superhero. Oh, maybe Bruce was right. Maybe I need to control my anger. That's the main thing. She doesn't even come to terms with that in this episode. She comes to terms with the fact that she needs to be both a superhero and a lawyer, but she doesn't really come to terms with the fact that she needs to learn how to control her anger, like actually learn, like Hulk was trying to teach her. And she doesn't even have a moment where, during the episode, where she's like, oh man, I need to make that decision. I need to be a superhero and a lawyer. She doesn't even have that, like, that character shift. It just kind of happens, which makes it it makes it ring hollow. It makes it like, oh, okay, so it just happened. Like, it's not very good storytelling. You didn't really have her go through any major realization that brought her to that point. It was just all the stuff Matt Murdock said in the previous episode. And so she's not even really struggling with it in the finale. She just decides to be it by the end. And so Kevin's like, well, how would you end your show? Because this is the ending I wanted, of all the characters coming together and it being crazy. How would you want your show ended? And She-Hulk's like, well, at first, I don't want the Hulk blood plotline, and I don't want Todd Phelps to get Hulkatized. So she strips him of his Hulkness, and she takes that plotline away. So now he's just Todd Phelps again. Then she starts talking about how Bruce can't just drop in from space, because we last saw him in space, Professor Hulk. He just can't drop in from space and save the day when this is my show. And so she decides to just take him out altogether. And the interesting part is that Kevin, the AI Kevin, is like, well, we wanted to introduce, and then she stops him. And then Kevin's like, well, he needed to say, and then she stops him again, and she says, just save it for the movie. That might mean we're getting a Mark Ruffalo Hulk film, which has been heavily rumored in recent times. The World War Hulk film has definitely been rumored, and that might be confirmation that that's what's happening, because she says save it for the movie, and Kevin doesn't deny it. Especially with something that happens later in the episode. So she says all that, and then she gets to Abomination, and Kevin's like, well, what do you want me to do with Abomination? And she's like, well, I would really just like him to take accountability for his actions. And so she just has him turn back into Blonsky and just accept the fact that he broke his parole and now has to go to prison again. And it's really funny hearing her say, well, I'd really just want him to take accountability for his actions, when she has not been very good about taking accountability for her actions. Like the rage scene at the end of the last episode, of her giving into her rage and destroying things and almost killing people. That's a flaw. That was a mistake. She did something wrong, even if she was provoked into doing it. Yet, she wants other people to take accountability for their actions, but she doesn't seem to want to take accountability for hers. That's a double standard. That's not right. That should not be promoted in this media. And so once all that's done, Jin's last request to Kevin is like, hey, can we bring Daredevil back? I really like Daredevil, and of course she did, because she hooked up with him in the last episode. And she says, a woman has needs. And then she makes a reference to, like, later when she's like, Bruce smashes buildings and I smash fourth walls and bad endings and Matt Murdock, ha ha ha. So it's like a stupid innuendo, and the gross part about that, well, there's a lot of gross parts about that, but one of the gross parts about that is that if a man talked about a woman like that, in the way she talked about Matt Murdock, where she's like, a woman has needs, and I, smashed Matt Murdock. If a man said that in reference to her, people would be livid. People would be like, well, a man can't say that about women, and he's sexist and chauvinist and all that stuff. Another double standard. She can say all that, but if a man said, well, a man has needs, in reference to hooking up with a woman, and then the man said, if it was Hulk saying, well, I, smashed that girl, people would freak out. People would scream bloody murder if that happened. And so that's just, I have major beef with that, because that's totally a double standard. Like, they can have the woman do what she wants, but if the opposite sex does it, if the men do it, that's bad. It's not bad if the woman does it. Anyway, Jin then says to Kevin, she's like, well, while we're here, what is it about daddy issues? What is it about all different Marvel guys having daddy issues? She mentions Tony, she mentions Loki, she mentions Thor, she mentions Star-Lord. So that's also very meta, because that has been brought up by several people of how many of the MCU protagonists have had father troubles, but Gamora has also had severe father trouble. In fact, her father killed her. Well, her adopted father, but still, her father murdered her in cold blood. And then she flat out asks Kevin, so this is the first mention of them in the entire MCU, when are the X-Men coming? When are we getting the X-Men? You just asked that? You're one of the characters in the MCU. You're one of the superheroes, and you're asking the higher up of all the superhero stuff happening in the MCU, and you're asking him, or it, I guess, because it's a robot, when are the X-Men coming? And then she does a look at the screen, she's like, so I guess they're on the horizon. Yay? The reason I say yay like that is because it's kind of hard to get like super excited about these details when now they're just being as irreverent as they want with their own universe. It doesn't seem to matter to them anymore. Like, hey, let's give you X-Men. Hey, let's give you a World War Hulk movie. Hey, let's give you this. Hey, let's give you that. Without respecting their own universe enough to treat it as if it was real. And not just treat it as all one big joke. All one big just cheap piece of entertainment. To say, hey, here you go. Here's some entertainment. This robot is designed to create all this entertainment for you. And that's what he's been doing for years. And if you're going to do it, there's a better way to do it. They actually did a very similar thing in the 1990s Spider-Man cartoon. Spider-Man, the animated series. Where at the end of that series, Spider-Man has been hopping through different universes trying to stop evildoers because the interdimensional traveler Madam Web has tasked him with stopping certain evildoers. But then after all that's done, Madam Web takes Spider-Man to the real world, and Spider-Man gets to meet Stan Lee. And Spider-Man has this chat with Stan Lee where Spider-Man's like, so in this universe, I'm in a comic book? And like kids read about me and they read about my story? And Stan's like, yeah, you're great. Like I wrote you to be inspiring. That is beautiful to me. That is a great way of doing it. It's like, it's not breaking the fourth wall, because Spider-Man never broke the fourth wall in the show. He talked to himself a lot in the cartoon, but he never actually talked to the camera. All of his talking to himself, which is what Spider-Man has done plenty of times in the comics, was kind of exposition dumping to the audience, and then sometimes it was explaining, most of the time it was explaining his thoughts to the audience of like what he was feeling in certain situations. But at the end of that series, that's what they do with him, is they actually have him go to the real world and meet Stan Lee. Because he met other Spider-Men from other universes, and one of these Spider-Men was actually an actor playing Spider-Man who was from the real world. And Madam Web had already had to take that Spider-Man back to his universe, which was the real world. So she ended up taking the real Spider-Man from the Earth 616 universe is established in the comics, like the actual center of the Marvel universe, which is what the MCU is. They took that Spider-Man, the actual Peter Parker, to meet Stan Lee. That is great. That is a phenomenal way of doing it. I really wish they would have done that instead of completely destroy the fundamental principles of having a fictional universe in the first place. It completely negating the fact that any of it matters and negating the fact that any of it has actual depth and you care about the characters, because you realize that they're just all made up and all of these things are just written inside their own universe. They're just contrived by this robot inside the universe. The only way they could explain this and maybe fix it is if they say that this was all a trick by some villain. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe the robot controlling all of this is actually a Marvel character who is responsible for controlling each and every one of these people's plot lines. So you thought it was crazy enough with what they did with the TVA and Loki, how like this one organization has access to any timeline they want, and they can just access any moment in the MCU they want to where they can just grab some Infinity Stones, and it doesn't matter because when they take the Infinity Stones to the TVA, they lose all their power. People thought that was crazy. This makes that look like nothing. And so she does all of her meta stuff, and Kevin's finally like, okay, you need to leave now, and you will not have access to me again. Like, you will not be able to speak to me again because you've completely ruined my ending that I had planned for the show. And Kevin's like, Kevin thinks it was such an awesome ending. And it would have been a crappy ending. It's true. She-Hulk is right. I mean, if they had ended like all of the people coming together for no reason, that would have been stupid. But it's also equally dumb when she just kind of resolves all the plot lines without resolving all the plot lines. So now she just contrives her own ending to the story to where her actual character arc doesn't exist anymore. She has no more character arc. There is really no ending for her journey because she was never really on a journey in the first place. And now Todd Phillips has just stopped. Now Blonsky's just going back to jail. And, once she gets back to her show and is seeing all the people off, Daredevil literally just drops out of the sky. And he's like, I'm here to help. And she's like, well, you missed it, but I'm glad to see you. And Daredevil's like, oh, well, yeah, thanks. And then they have a grill out in Jen's parents' backyard with Matt Murdock. And Jen's aunt and Jen's dad start talking about the money that Matt Murdock is making in Hell's Kitchen as a lawyer. And then the dad even mentions, like, raising kids in LA is not cheap. Doing the parent thing, like pushing the couple to go ahead and tie the knot and have children, which is just really funny of all characters for Matt Murdock to fall in love with and seem to be having an ongoing relationship with is She-Hulk. that I never would have figured that. But then that's not even the main banger, is that you get to see Matt Murdock again. Oh, no. Professor Hulk actually comes back for real that time. And he sees the whole family, and he's like, hey, I know I've been gone a while. And he says, I've been gone at Sakaar for a long time. So he did actually go back to Sakaar, because that was a Sakaran ship that he was flying in space on the last time we saw him. And he says, hey, I know I've been gone a long time, and I would love to tell you all about it. But first, let me introduce you to my son, Scar. Very nonchalantly, he's just like, hey, by the way, I would like you all to meet my son. The implications of Bruce having a son? A fathillion questions. First of all, who with? What woman did you have a son with? Second of all, he shouldn't even be that old, because it was only 9 years before that he even went to Sakaar in the first place, and then started fighting in the arena, because that was in 2015, and I'm pretty sure She-Hulk takes place in 2024, so Scar should be a kid, but he looks like 18, and yes, I know there's all the comic plot line about that in the comics of him having a son, and I forget who it's with. I think it is one of the women at Sakaar, which is likely what they're going to do there. But it's just like, oh, he had a son out of nowhere. I did hear rumors that they might be doing that storyline in the World War Hulk movie, and that would have made a lot more sense to introduce it there, because that way you could flesh it all out and explain all of it. And it wouldn't be such a jarring reveal. It's like, oh, yeah, what? What? Also, I thought it was established that Bruce couldn't even physically have children in Age of Ultron. Maybe the reason that he can or could was because he had a child as the Hulk, not as Bruce. He may not be able to have children as Bruce because established in the Edward Norton Hulk movie, because of him, when his adrenaline rises, he turns into the Hulk. It would be physically impossible for him to have a child with a woman as Bruce Banner because of the processes required to have a child. So I assume it's because he's probably had the child with a woman when he was in Hulk form, because he was already in Hulk form. That's probably how he could have a child. So maybe. But it's just such a jarring, like, oh, by the way, Hulk has a son. What? What? And he's Scar. What? And also the CGI for Scar looks terrible. And he has the weirdest haircut. It might be from the comics. Even still, I don't care. That is the terrible look for Scar. Just the CGI in his hair. It's just like, oh gosh. But still, he has a son. And then it flashes to She-Hulk talking to one of the news guys about, prosecuting Todd Phelps for what he did to her. And she essentially says, people like Todd Phelps who endanger people and hurt people and harass people should be stood up against, should be fought. And the news guy is like, should they be fought in a legal sense or in a superhero sense? And then she's like, both. So she officially has accepted the fact that she is now a superhero and a lawyer at the same time. The funny thing is, she does really no superhero stuff in this episode other than take out a few MCU employees to get to K.E.V.I.N, which isn't really superhero stuff. It's just getting the people out of her way so she can get to what she wants. The episode ends. So that's the ending of She-Hulk. Post-credit scene, Blonsky is back in prison because he violated his parole. Because Jennifer saw him off when she finally got back to her actual show. Because, she had him take responsibility for his actions, and so he decided to turn himself in peacefully. And of course he's in the prison because, he turned into the Abomination, and he was not supposed to do that because that was part of his parole, is that he cannot turn into the Abomination. But he did, without anybody's consent, so he has to go back to prison now, apparently for 10 years. But the post-credit scene is him in prison, in his cell that he was in before, and then Wong opens a portal in the prison, and Blonsky's like, well, it took you long enough. Did you get sucked into another show? And at first I thought that was another fourth wall break. I'm like, wait, so is he acknowledging that Wong is in other shows now? And then I realized that he might just be talking about the fact that Wong was obsessed with The Sopranos in episode 4, watching that show, and so Blonsky probably just meant like, hey, did you just get caught up watching another TV show? And then it's funny because Wong has this line where he's like, we are in an era of peak television. I think it's funny because Wong is supposed to be the wise, mentor-esque kind of character, and that might be the dumbest thing I've ever heard any fictional character say ever. We are not in the peak era of television. We are not. I mean, you got Rings of Power, you got this show, or at least for me, it ain't doing so great. We are not in the peak era of television. Oh man, so yes, Blonsky goes with him to Kamar-Taj. Blonsky starts asking all these questions of like, hey, do they have Wi-Fi here? What is your guys' policy like? And so Blonsky is part of, I guess, the Sorcerer's Order now, which I guess kind of makes sense from, him fighting Wong previously and that whole debacle going down, and now that he's become like a meditation coach, he's all about finding inner peace and namaste and whatnot, and all that stuff kind of falls in line with some of the beliefs and theologies of Kamar-Taj, of how like they want to discover the deeper parts about themselves, and they're all about spirit. So I guess that does have some consistency with it. And I guess at least now he's not in prison anymore. At least now he's somewhere else and could be used for something else, and maybe he will be in Thunderbolts, even though he wasn't announced in the casting. Bottom line is, they ruined him. They ruined him. Flat out ruined him. They mutilated his character. He's just a meditation coach who is not even scary anymore in persona. Even when he's Abomination, he's just like talking like, hey, we're having a good time. In his normal Tim Roth voice. No extra snarls or like him having a deep, intimidating voice like in the Edward Norton Hulk movie. No, none of that. And even when he's not in Abomination form, he was like this hardcore military guy. He'd get things done. He likes a challenge. He wants to fight. That's all he wants to do. He just wants power. None of that anymore. He's just about finding inner peace and finding the deeper spirit within yourself. So not just entirely pointless. He wasn't faking. Entirely pointless. That's it. Somehow that's the most meaningful post-credit scene of the whole season. I struggle because it's like, is this like the worst finale that Disney has put out because of what they've done? I would say not, because there was like I was getting a few grins. Like there is a slight part of me that thinks it was fun seeing her be that like breaking the fourth wall to that extent. But there's definitely the larger part of me that's like that completely ruins the MCU. That completely ruins the universe. That completely breaks the universe. And you know, there was also, I got a grin out of seeing Matt Murdock be introduced to Hulk. Like he's in the MCU now. That's great. I genuinely enjoyed that. But again, it's like with all the stuff that just happened, that doesn't even matter anymore. So it's not the worst finale ever. I think that WandaVision might still hold that title because it was, for me at least, it was because of the finale that show ended up being terrible instead of phenomenal. The one episode shows you how, you know, just one bad ending can ruin a whole project. And so, yeah, She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. We have the first season. They even gave hints to there being a season 2. There could be. I guess we'll just have to wait for confirmation. That might have been it. That might have been their version of confirmation, is them slightly mentioning it in this episode when she was going into the real world / not real world, trying to figure out how to end her show better, which was still stupid because she didn't end her show better. She just resolved the plot lines immediately without really resolving them. Nobody actually got any growth or changed or anything like that. It was just, hey, we're done now. All of a sudden, none of it matters. Any plot lines, any characters that had potential for some extra depth, potential for some extra growth, potential for some extra story to be told with them, that was like meaningful. None of it was done like that. It was just a bunch of irreverent crap. So overall, unfortunately for this show, now that I officially finished it, wasn't good. Wasn't good. I think I just give it a that opening of this episode, the old Hulk TV series opening, maybe bumped me up to like a 3. But it's the first episode is still the best. It's still the best. We had 8 others, and it still remained the best. And that one wasn't even great. And you know, it had good parts about it. It had some potential. So it was, you know, decent. I thought, but it just every episode after that just ruined the setup, and we didn't barely even get a payoff, if at all. She's a superhero now. Barely. Oh boy. So yes, that is my review for She-Hulk episode 9. She-Hulk Attorney at Law episode 9, the finale. It was certainly not boring. It was definitely shocking. It was definitely mind-blowing. It was definitely mind-boggling. Definitely intriguing. But all of it then just rendered pointless. Like it broke the multiverse. Because if they've established now that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man are in the MCM, I guess the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse, which is connected to the MCU. And now that Hugh Jackman is going to be Wolverine in Deadpool 3, that implies that the X-Men Fox universe happens somewhere in the multiverse. So, especially if Deadpool 3 is taking place in the MCU, so that's will probably involve some multiversal stuff. So if that's connected to the MCU, then that's also in the category. So essentially this episode kind of just broke all of Marvel. Forget just the MCU, like that it destroyed like everything. Maybe it is the worst finale. No, I think WandaVision is still the worst finale, but this episode did not help itself at all. That's my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. May the Lord be with you. May the Force be with you. I want good content. Let's pray for good content. Goodbye. Love you guys. That's a wrap.